Yes, my friends, things suddenly got tense behind the scenes in Baltimore, and we seriously need to talk about what just happened at Ravens practice. Because honestly, this was supposed to be a great day for the flock. Travis Jones was back, Anya's Peebles was practicing, Keon Martin returned, and even Zay Flowers was back in the building. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction until Nate Wiggins went down. And man, this is the kind of situation no Ravens fan wants to see. Wiggins was carted off the field after suffering what appeared to be a left leg or knee injury, and the most concerning detail is that he couldn't put any weight on that left leg while heading into the facility. We still don't know exactly how serious this injury is, so right now I want to know where you stand. Are you really worried about Nate Wiggins after what happened? Or do you believe we're going to get some good news and see number 2 back on that field soon? Write your opinion in the comments. And if you've been a Baltimore Ravens fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. Let's see how many longtime members of the flock are watching us today. Because after all the good news we got from practice, one moment completely changed the mood in Baltimore. Alright, let's talk about Nate Wiggins. Now let's get straight into this, because the Nate Wiggins situation changed dramatically in only a matter of hours. When Wiggins was carted off during Ravens training camp, there was every reason for fans to be concerned. Seeing any player leave practice that way is scary. Seeing one of your important young cornerbacks unable to put weight on his leg makes it even worse. We have all watched football long enough to understand why the reaction was immediate. When somebody has to be helped off the field and cannot put weight on the injured leg, your mind does not normally go somewhere positive. You start wondering how serious the injury might be and how much time that player could potentially miss. That was the fear surrounding Wiggins. Then the updates started coming in, and suddenly the entire mood changed. Ian Rappaport reported that there was no structural damage for Wiggins. That alone was a major piece of encouraging information for Baltimore. But understandably, Ravens fans still wanted to know more. No structural damage sounds good, but the next question is obvious. What does that mean for his return? That is where Jeff Zrebiec's update made the situation even more encouraging. According to the information in the report, after Wiggins underwent an MRI, the Ravens believed the young cornerback had avoided a major injury. He could still be sidelined for a little while, so nobody should expect Baltimore to unnecessarily rush him back onto the field. But the most important part was the expectation that Wiggins will return sooner rather than later. Those 4 words completely changed the feeling around this situation. Think about where Ravens fans were when they first saw him leave the field. There were questions about whether this could become something that affected his season before it even really started. Now the conversation is not about whether Wiggins can return. The expectation is that he will return, and apparently the wait might not be nearly as long as people initially feared. That is a huge relief for this defense. And while Baltimore obviously wants Wiggins healthy and on the field, this scare also reminds us why having depth at cornerback matters so much. The Ravens have Marlon Humphrey in that secondary, and they also kept T.J. Tampa, which suddenly looks even more important after what happened with Wiggins. In fact, there had already been an interesting report about Tampa before the Wiggins injury. According to Jeff Zrebiec, Baltimore had received trade calls about Tampa during the previous 10 months, but the Ravens were reluctant to move him because they viewed their 2024 fourth-round pick as a capable starter. That decision looks pretty important right now. Tampa had not received a real opportunity to start yet, but he had been making an impression in camp. He had not been giving up many plays and had stood out in both one-on-one work and team drills. The report even indicated that Tampa could be pushing veteran Chido Awuzie for the number 3 outside cornerback role. And then, only a couple of days later, Wiggins gets hurt. That is exactly why the old idea that you can never have enough cornerbacks continues to make so much sense. This is a passing league. Injuries happen. Situations change quickly. One day you might look at a position and think there are almost too many players competing for snaps. The next day, one injury changes the entire picture.
So keeping Tampa instead of trading him could prove valuable. Bringing back Awuzie gives Baltimore another option. Keeping Humphrey matters. And when Wiggins returns, Jesse Minter should have multiple pieces available to build this secondary the way he wants. That brings us to another important part of this defense, the scheme. The expectation is that this new defensive system can help the secondary as a whole. Baltimore's defensive backs should benefit from a stronger pass rush and from being placed in better situations before the snap. Last season, there were frustrating moments when cornerbacks appeared to be giving receivers huge cushions even on downs where the offense only needed a few yards. That put tremendous pressure on the defense. Now the Ravens are entering the Jesse Minter era with the hope that the structure itself will make life easier for everybody. And Baltimore has also added personnel that should help up front. Trey Hendrickson gives this defense a dominant pass-rushing presence. Calais Campbell is part of the group, and Travis Jones comes into this season with more experience. But personnel alone does not solve everything. The scheme has to put those players in position to succeed. If the pass rush gets home faster, the secondary does not have to cover forever. If the defensive backs are put in better situations before the snap, quarterbacks should not constantly have easy throws sitting in front of them. Everything works together. That is why Wiggins returning sooner rather than later is such important news. Baltimore wants to see what this defense can become with its young corner available, but the Ravens also appear to have enough depth that they do not need to panic and force him back before he is ready. And Wiggins was not the only reason Ravens fans had something to smile about. We need to talk about Tyler Loop. Loop has been under serious pressure from Ravens fans, particularly because of how last season ended in Pittsburgh. That ending put him under the microscope, and people entered this training camp watching every kick closely. So what has he done? He has responded. Jameson Hensley reported that Loop had another perfect day in camp, making all 7 of his kicks. And when we say perfect, we mean exactly that, 7 attempts and 7 makes. Even better, Loop was reported to be 33 of 35 during training camp, which works out to 94.2%. And there is another number that should really get everybody's attention. He had made all 8 of his attempts from beyond 50 yards. 8 attempts from longer than 50 yards. 8 makes. Now, everybody understands the obvious point here. Training camp is not a regular season game. It is not a playoff game. The pressure is different when the stadium is full, the score is close, and one kick can decide whether you win or lose. But practice still matters. Confidence has to be built somewhere. Repetition matters. Technique matters. Creating good habits matters. If a kicker is struggling throughout camp, everybody would be talking about it. So when Loop is consistently making kicks, including every attempt he had taken from beyond 50 yards at that point, we should acknowledge that too. He still has to carry that performance into real games. Nobody is denying that. But 33 of 35 is exactly the kind of camp Baltimore wanted to see from him. And that positive news becomes even more interesting because the Ravens are getting closer to finally showing us what this new era looks like in an actual preseason game. The coaching staff is not expected to completely hide every established player. Jesse Minter indicated that some established players would still participate in the preseason, although Lamar Jackson would not play that Saturday. That creates an interesting balance. Baltimore has already dealt with a few injury scares. A rookie head coach could easily become more cautious after seeing important players go down during camp. But based on what was said, the plan did not appear to be changing completely. Some established players would still get work. And honestly, this preseason